It doesn't take long for newcomers to the world of Azeroth to realize its impact on gaming. From exploring the massive world to discovering countless quests and enemies, to uncovering the deeper story of these lands, the experience of playing classic WoW is like none other, and I'm sure many of you agree. The game is widely considered a masterpiece, and almost 20 years later, the original classic version is still going strong. Today though, I want to explore one specific region of the map that encompasses that classic feel, with spectacular questing and a story that draws you into this fantasy realm. The human level 1 to 30 starting experience. 4 zones, 4 very different types of atmosphere and conflict, each building toward a satisfying conclusion that sees players uncovering plots and eventually reaching level 30, ready to move on to more exotic lands. This video is an overview and review of these areas, but I've also included quite a few small details and secrets that I personally think enhance the gameplay and make for an awesome intro experience. This part of the game is my absolute favorite. And this video does include my own opinions, but maybe by the end of it, you'll see what makes these 4 zones, collectively, the greatest adventure in WoW history. As soon as you enter the world, before you even start playing really, you're greeted with the iconic intro cinematic for the humans. I won't play the whole thing here, but I think the last few sentences are especially important for the story and the motivations of your character.
Backed by their stalwart allies, the armies of Stormwind have been called away to fight the savage horde on distant battlefields. With the armies gone, the defense of Stormwind now falls to its proud citizens. You must defend the kingdom against the foul mongrels that encroach upon it, and hunt down the subversive traitors who seek to destroy it from within. Now is the time for heroes. Now humanity's greatest chapter can be told.
And this right here is such a crucial point to start off with. As we'll see going forward into the human lands, there are threats both external and internal that play huge roles in the story all the way up to level 30 and beyond, and it's your responsibility to seek out and deal with them. From your very first steps within Northshire Valley, you start to uncover how the peace of Elwynn Forest is on the verge of collapse. Thugs belonging to the Defias Brotherhood have taken over the local vineyard, and small rat creatures known as kobolds have claimed ownership of the mine. Even in these first few levels, Northshire does a great job of blending the realistic and supernatural, having you begin by fighting renegade humans, timberwolves, and the odd kobolds in the same area. Cleaning up the issues here, the Marshal of Northshire sends you south to Goldshire, the trading and questing center of the zone, where many more tasks begin. On your way south to the Fargo Deep Mine, I really like how the game offers you the chance to explore smaller quest areas like the McClure Vineyards that you're not explicitly led to. The map in WoW gradually reveals itself to you as you discover pieces of it in real time, giving you a minor incentive to fill out the map as you travel. Stopping by here at level 5 or 6 really helps in gaining experience, as there are several quests to be found here and at the nearby Stonefield Farm. These lead you to other areas that you otherwise wouldn't have much reason to visit, such as the Murloc-infested Crystal Lake, an especially challenging spot if you grow overconfident wading into the water. After Central Elwynn, the penultimate area of the zone is the East Vale Logging Camp, which further highlights the problems facing the kingdom, including the Defias and the Murlocs. On your way out of the zone, the final issue to contend with are the Riverpaw Gnolls, a tribe of beastmen that have taken over the southwest. By picking up a bounty on the message board at Westburt Garrison, you now have a reason to track the menacing Hogger, leader of the Gnolls here, and the first elite creature you've seen up to this point. Even for players past level 10, this can be a tough fight, and if you're too reckless, this may be your first lesson in needing to collaborate with other players to succeed. If you're thorough or lucky enough, you may also find the Gold Pickup Schedule, a quest item from the Gnolls that reveals the true scheme within Elwynn. Both the kobolds and Gnolls are working under the Defias to redirect mining routes to Westfall. Finding and eliminating Morgan the Collector at the Brackwell Pumpkin Patch is essentially the end of the first chapter of this story, with only a few hints as to what may come next. Marshal Dougan exclaims, You found him? Well done. He won't be collecting from the Elwyn mines again. And this ring you found is interesting. It's a membership ring for the old stonemasons guild in Stormwind. Why would a Lowly thief have an artisan guild ring? And why are the Defias thieves collecting money from our mines? Moreover, the gold pickup schedule includes a nod of encouragement from the Defias higher-up who wrote the letter. Remember, my brothers, we were once proud craftsmen. We'll perform our current duties with the same precision we used in our past trade. Signed, EVC. With this story fresh in your mind, you may be ready to take on Westfall, but there are still a few matters to attend to. By this point, you've probably reached level 10, and regardless of the class you're playing, a visit to the capital is in order to begin a special class quest. As a side note, Stormwind City is perhaps the most organized of all the capitals, and it's a great introductory experience to all the goods, services, and quests that can be found here. After finding your class trainer, you'll head back out into the forest to a destination unique to your class. Beforehand or during this time, you might be able to clear up some of the last missing areas on your map, such as the idyllic Mirror Lake, Ridgepoint Tower, or the island on Stonecairn Lake, a memorial to fallen defenders of Stormwind. I couldn't leave out two of the most isolated spots that adventurous players might just stumble across. Above Mirror Lake, a hidden path leads up to Thunder Falls, another of the Defias gang's newest holdings. There are no quests specific to this spot, but it can be quite peaceful once the enemies are dealt with. In the northeast, traveling past Stonecairn Lake reveals another large encampment of gnolls and a ruined cottage, revealing their encroachment was not entirely resolved with the defeat of Hogger. One final detail worth mentioning are the ruined war machines that can be found throughout Elwyn, remnants of wars long past that are now overgrown with the passage of time. Elwyn Forest is by itself one of the greatest zones ever created. The quests flow nicely but aren't boringly linear, the environment is fitting for a hero just starting out on their journey, the music is iconic, and the threats established here seamlessly carry over into the next zone. Let's introduce another zone into this puzzle. Chapter 2 in our journey on Azeroth. Across the river from Westburt Garrison, the woods of Elwyn fade away into the expanse of golden plains called Westfall. Once the breadbasket of human lands, but now the domain of the Defias. The first people you meet here are the Furlbrows, farmers who are fed up with the bandits and are leaving for Stormwind. If you were, again, rather lucky back in Elwyn, you might have picked up Furlbrow's deed from one of the bandits, and returning it to the couple might just allow them to return one day and restart their lives. There's this dichotomy between abandonment and resilience that is really apparent in this zone, and compared to Elwyn, where civilization appears more secure, Westfall is a land in turmoil, with the good folk forced to leave and chaos presiding ever since. The one saving grace is Sentinel Hill, an outpost of Stormwind now maintained by the People's Militia, a group of ragtag civilians led by the single paladin, Gryan Stoutmantle, who have banded together for safety and are the closest thing to a governing body in the zone. All around, farms have burned and crops have been pillaged, but it is here from this tower where the militia seeks to strike back against the Defias and their allies. Starting off in a similar thread to Elwyn Forest, quest givers send you to liberate places of importance, including the Jangalode Mine, several of the farmsteads, and the outskirts of the town of Moonbrook, once the bustling heart of Westfall, now little more than a ghost town. Gnolls, Murlocs, and Kobolds are continuing threats as well, providing a good sense of continuity between the two zones. But there are also new foes, including the Mechanical Harvesters, strange, scarecrow-like mobs controlled by the Defias. While you're exploring and dealing with all of these threats, Westfall is also a great example of how the game trains your in-game behavior outside of the starting zone. Instead of finding everything at Sentinel Hill, you'll probably end up taking a short griffin ride back to Stormwind every few levels to visit your class trainer or work on your professions. In turn, this also highlights the importance of keeping track of your Hearthstone to quickly move between these locations and others as needed. By happenstance, you may also visit Cathedral Square around this time and meet Boros Alexton, architect of the city, who asks you to relive his humble beginnings in Westfall and collect his childhood compass from the Alexton farmstead. Another example of someone who left this rural land but still holds on to pieces of it. As you continue to quest and level, you begin to circle back to the deeper lore of the Defias Brotherhood and their intentions. At level 14, Stoutmantle asks you to visit the town of Lakeshire in the Red Ridge Mountains. This is the first breadcrumb quest that introduces the third of 4 zones on our docket, and is really the first objective to introduce multi-zone questing into the main story. We'll come back to Red Ridge in due time, but at this point in your journey, you may have just stopped by Lakeshire to meet with your contact Wily before flying back to Sentinel Hill. Shortly after, the plans of the Defias are truly exposed by the intel of Master Shaw in Stormwind, who explains to you the Stonemasons Guild, feeling betrayed by the House of Nobles' refusal to pay up after the reconstruction of Stormwind, rebelled against the kingdom. Many of the craftsmen reforming under the bandanas of the Defias Brotherhood, led by none other than Edwin Van Cleef, EVC. With more of the puzzle pieces falling into place, Stoutmantle has you intercept a Defias messenger to gather more evidence, then escort the turncoat Defias traitor to the secret location of the Defias hideout, underneath a barn in the town of Moonbrook. This revelation is really cool because it's one of the most well-hidden entrances to a dungeon, and without any outside help, it's really only possible to find this place by questing. The Dead Mines are no solo endeavor, and whether by reading the quest log or entering the mines on your own, you'll quickly realize it is a group effort to take down Van Cleef and his minions. As you progress through the dungeon, the tunnels and rooms give you little hints of what's to come. The Mast Room, the Goblin Foundry. If you are paying attention, the reveal at Ironclad Cove may be less surprising, but no less awesome. A giant juggernaut vessel from the time of the Second War is being reconstructed here in a dim grotto, Van Cleef's final plan for an assault on Stormwind. The pirate theme is in full swing here, which ties back to the coastal theme of Westfall in general, with shipwrecks and even treasure to be found along the coast. The massive doors at the exit to the cove are also visible in the outer game world in the very south of Westfall. An awesome continuity detail that many players probably miss out on. Fighting your way atop the battleship, Van Cleef and his personal guard put up an impressive defense, but the ringleader eventually falls, crippling the Defias effort. In my opinion, the Dead Mines are the perfect start to a player's dungeon experience. It's not too long or too short, it has great connections to the story and enemies of the zone it's in, and it's one of the few instances in the game to have a back exit portal, in this case one that leads out to the sunlit Dagger Hills. Returning to Sentinel Hill victorious, you're able to acquire some nice rewards, and potentially approach level 20 in the process. A beautiful culmination to the zone, and so far, 20 levels of story related to the Defias gang and their allies. But this is far from the end of the story. On Van Cleef's body, you can recover an unsent letter addressed to none other than Baros Alexton, the architect, who was once a fellow stonemason like Van Cleef. He has this to say about it. Edwin, I see the years haven't changed you a bit. An idealist as ever, and a romantic. He doesn't care who he hurts. Revenge has consumed him. But then, I'm not sure I can blame him. There are numerous videos online about why Van Cleef is a great villain, and this quote really captures the essence of it. After being cheated and scammed by the Stormwind nobles, the stonemasons did have cause to push back. They just went about this cause in violent and bloody ways. When considering Westfall and Elwyn side by side, it's hard to pick which is superior, but Westfall is certainly a great sophomore zone in its own right, ramping up the quests and story while giving players more freedom with their timeline and introducing them to flight paths and dungeons. We'll return to the story of the Defias and Van Cleef's revenge at the end of the video, but for now, let's return to a different aspect of the story, Red Ridge. Those mysterious mountains to the east that bring the conflict in the kingdom to a whole new level. Depending on your preferences, you may have visited Red Ridge multiple times before bringing down Van Cleef, but I felt like saving the zone in its entirety for one continuous section. Starting around level 15, players might start supplementing their quests in Westfall by visiting the quiet town of Lakeshire, or at least somewhat quiet. See, Red Ridge doesn't have a Defias problem, but it does have plenty of others. Blackrock orcs from the north have invaded the zone, ravaging Stonewatch Keep, once a great bastion of Stormwind's defense. Gnolls are also seen in greater numbers here, the howling in the hills keeping the residents on edge. And if that wasn't enough to contend with, a dark wizard has taken refuge in the Tower of Ilgalar, experimenting with evil magic. Though none of these foes now attack Lakeshire directly, it seems they are just biding their time on the fringe, waiting for the moment to strike. Compared to the previous two zones, Red Ridge is the turning point from internal, relatively run-of-the-mill threats to external forces seeking harm against Stormwind. Blackrock Mountain itself was one of the key locations in the Second War, and the orcs that dwell there present a very real and ongoing threat, at least in certain areas of the map. Even the wildlife seems more invasive, with black dragon whelps spitting fire at passerby, and large spiders wreaking havoc at Althor's Mill. If Westfall was the sequel to Elwyn, Red Ridge is its ironic antithesis, a zone with peaceful music, pristine waterfalls, and the Great Lake Everstill, but in reality is teeming with deadly factions just waiting around the corner, sometimes literally. Despite this change in tone, there are still familiar, almost wholesome moments in the mix, bringing a guard his lunch, rescuing a child's lost necklace, and collecting a toolbox from the bottom of the lake. Just mind the local thresher. There are two key things that stand out to me as especially important here, and they are enemy groupings and multi-zone questing. Apart from the necessity of a group for the climactic Stonewatch Keep and Tower of Ilgalar, both of which are filled with elites, many of the standard areas require aid as well. Hunting down Yowler, pack leader of the Red Ridge Gnolls, brings you to a camp where the target is virtually surrounded by adds, requiring strategy, skill, or maybe a bit of patience to prevail and bring in his paw for a reward. Gallardell Valley is a similar story, with many packs of gnolls roaming around, including some stealthed ones. Stonewatch is also likely the first or maybe second time players have grouped up for elite content outside of a dungeon, setting up the precedent for so-called micro-dungeons scattered across the world. In terms of multi-zone questing, Red Ridge is really where the wide-ranging story beats start to hit. Like Westfall, Lakeshire has mysteriously stopped receiving troops, and Magistrate Solomon is growing desperate, sending you to the capital, Sentinel Hill, and the hamlet of Darkshire for aid, unfortunately receiving none. On a lighter note, the barkeep needs to stock up on drinks, and requests a couple specific items from around the neighboring zones. Even something as simple as a Shadowhide Gnoll pendant found in Gallardell Valley can have you retracing your steps in meaningful ways, sending you to the mystic Tower of Azora back in Elwyn to plan against the Dark Sorcerer Morganth. These types of quests are so important because they're the glue that sticks these four zones together, and are at least the first strong examples in your journey that extend throughout the life cycle of the zone. There are also inverse examples as well. Take a look at the Rethban Ore quest that begins in Cathedral Square, sending you first to revisit the nostalgic Northshire Abbey before pointing you back to Red Ridge, where you can discover a hidden cave in the Gnoll Canyons you might never have found otherwise. The zone is both a destination and a jumping off point for a lot of different quests, but it's also unique in that it's one of the few examples of what I call an anti-quest. At the entrance to the Lakeshire Inn, a notice board simply says this: Missing, Corporal Keishan. Last seen during the bloody battle at Stonewatch Keep, Corporal Keishan was reported to have been dragged away by Blackrock orcs. It is believed that Corporal Keishan is being held as a prisoner of war at the Blackrock encampment north of Lakeshire, just west of the pass leading to the Burning Steps. In most situations, this would start a quest to find the missing soldier, but here, it's just an object, a detail for you to look at or not to look at on your journey. At Render's Rock, the location referenced in the notice, there isn't an explicit need to venture far into the back of the cave, and if you hadn't paid attention to the notice, you might have missed out on a great escape. In the depths of the cave, bruised and battered, is Corporal Keishan. Escorting him to safety, no small feat for a solo player, a short interaction plays out as the soldier returns to serve his kingdom. While the reward for the quest isn't great, it might just be enough to know this little anti-quest was placed here for a reason, and that some players might have been observant enough to follow the clues and find this missing soldier. Redridge as a zone is both the familiar and the unfamiliar. A new frontier of quests, enemies, and cool places that I think a lot of Alliance players really enjoy, myself included. As you progress past level 20 and closer to 25, your adventures here will likely draw to a close. After laying siege with your allies to Stonewatch and the Tower of Ilgalar, the Orc and Gnoll forces are left fairly decimated, but all the while, the looming figure of Blackrock Mountain in the distance is a reminder that at least one threat is not over, and the menacing path to the Burning Steppes may just have to be traversed another day. At this point, nearly all of your remaining objectives will point south, into the final of our 4 zones, the Forsaken Territory of Duskwood. There's a lot to unpack here, and this zone really rounds out our quartet with some incredible design choices that I believe are brilliant and, frankly, unparalleled. Duskwood is likely the most corrupted land you have visited up to this point, a decrepit place that serves as a grim reflection of Elwyn Forest, the trees gnarled and filled with spiderwebs, untended graves teeming with the living dead. This area was once known as Brightwood, though the sun hardly shines now, and the grand hamlet of yore is now known as Darkshire, the last holdout against the coming darkness. Walking into this zone from either Westfall or Redridge, you can immediately tell this is going to be a different type of experience, one of evil things lurking about, and a haunting music track that perfectly fits the zone. There are many quests found in Darkshire, and the stories here build on the previous chapters, but with a darker twist. The Night Watch patrols the main roads in these lands, but without reinforcement from Stormwind, many of the orchards and farms here have been overrun with darkness, and the cemeteries, once proud monuments to those who fell in the Great Wars, are now twisted and desecrated. One thing that takes center stage in Duskwood is, fittingly, the villains, and most of the major quest lines here lead you to resolving one of the 3 major threats. I want to talk about each of these, and they're in no particular order since you'll probably be working on all of them around the same time. The most infamous of these is probably the Legend of Stalvin, a cross-zone mystery that has you revisiting previous zones to piece together a murder perpetrated by the psychotic Stalvin Mistmantle. Going back to Moonbrook, to Goldshire, to the Eastvale logging camp and more really builds on these layers of history present throughout the game, and having the Curse of Stalvin debuff as a feature gives it an added uniqueness. The story ends by tracking down Stalvin at his manor in northern Duskwood, surrounded by undead, and he himself has deteriorated into a husk. Doling out justice on him ends the story and prevents further harm to the already struggling community. Also, having the Warlock quest item that is collected here be named the Tear of Taloa is an excellent tie back to the lore. Stalvin's story is great, but it doesn't have too much of an effect on Duskwood itself, and is instead just a really cool standalone story that fits really well with the spooky atmosphere. Sven's revenge, however, is much more innately tied to the issues in this zone. Taking a supply shipment out to the Darkened Bank, you meet Sven Jorgen, a farmer turned fighter whose family was slain by the Dark Riders, allies of the necromancer Morbent Fell. Fell is the reason for the large undead presence in this zone, and has completely taken over the Ravenhill Cemetery in the western part of Duskwood. While this might first appear as just another elite boss at the end of a zone, Fell is different, and far more powerful. To break the enchanted wards surrounding him, Sven helps you venture briefly to the north and the Dwarven wetlands to recover some blessed Lightforge iron to craft a holy torch. While this might seem antithetical to my original point, that the 4 original zones are a great adventure on their own, I think giving players a small detour to introduce them to the other regions and races of the Alliance is helpful from a gameplay perspective, a teaser of where players can visit once completing the human lands. Returning to Duskwood with the Holy Artifact, Fell is no longer invulnerable, but still requires a group to bring down and end his tyranny. This is a great combination of both solo and collaborative efforts, as you won't be successful in defeating this villain without one or the other. This brings us to our third main antagonist, the Embalmer, or as we first know him, Abercrombie the Hermit. In the beginning, he seems to just be a harmless old man, and we bring him some supplies from town out to his shack on the other side of Raven Hill. After doing some errands for him, however, it starts to become clear that something is off about his requests.
You warm an old man's heart with your with your kindness. Thank the neck. Well, thank you. You have more than earned your reward.
The environment here is also barely habitable. Ghouls patrol nearby, the pile of disturbed earth behind the shack is unsettling, not to mention the large, sinister crate placed nearby. Near the climax of this quest chain, Abercrombie has you take a note to the mayor of Darkshire, where it's revealed your efforts weren't innocent tasks, but actually steps in creating a horrific abomination, Stitches, who spawns at the cemetery and begins lurching toward town with a vengeance. If you stick around long enough, you'll actually be able to witness the battle in the town square, with the Night Watch and everyday players rallying to take down the monster. The final step is to dig up the hermit's reanimated wife Eliza behind the shack and claim the Embalmer's heart, which breaks his power forever. Red Ridge might have had the first anti-quest, but Duskwood has one of the most memorable first anti-quest givers, a villain in disguise whose tasks actually have a real consequence if you follow through with his scheme. I won't go into detail on all the supporting quests and characters, but anybody who's played through this region knows it's special. While you're handling all these major stories, you might also wander down into the Dawning Wood Catacombs, a crypt with a secret tunnel all the way to the other side of the cemetery where Morbant Fell's secret lab can be found. You can approach this underground complex from either end, and finding the earthen passage connecting the two halves is a really neat discovery. Despite being an undead-infested forest, Duskwood is also surprisingly diverse in its enemy encounters, with beasts, grave robbers, ogres, and even the Defias making an appearance. But I think the standout are the Worgen, WoW's version of werewolves. One of the most interesting design choices to me is that Duskwood never fully reveals the origin behind these creatures, and the Night Watch is only interested in stemming the tide of the beasts that seem to just materialize in the woods. It's only through the efforts of Night Elf adventurers visiting Duskwood from Ashenvale who help reveal the full story. The lost Scythe of Elune is behind the Worgen threat. I made a whole separate video on that adventure, but in relation to Duskwood as a zone, it's quite fascinating and frankly fitting that another race with more experience and magical artifacts is able to unravel the true history here, bringing their evidence and clues with them to investigate a world-spanning mystery. As a human, just starting out in these lands, there's virtually no chance of you discovering the truth on your first playthrough, but that's what makes trying out other characters and storylines so fulfilling. The one other important tale I'll mention is something of a hidden quest, a footnote on Brightwood's history that helps round out the zone rather nicely. On the approach to level 30 and perhaps beyond, you might find a weathered grave on the outskirts of Ravenhill Cemetery, which reads the name Morgan Lattimore. After doing some research in the Darkshire Town Hall, it is revealed that Morgan was once a proud knight of Stormwind, who lost his mind and body to violence after his family passed away, eventually being risen by the dark powers of Duskwood to continue his indiscriminate rampage. This is where the undead, known as Mor Ladim, who wanders Ravenhill, comes to the forefront of your quest. After dodging this elite raider for a good while in your adventures, it is finally time to gather your friends and put him to rest. Doing so unlocks a bittersweet ending, where you discover that one of Morgan's children actually survived and is now a member of the Night Watch, and it also involves getting a pretty sweet sword after visiting the weathered grave one last time. The quests in Duskwood flow so nicely together, and even though much of your travel will be spent going between Darkshire and the major locations like Ravenhill, there's almost always multiple things happening in either direction to make it worthwhile. The environment does exactly what it wants to achieve and more, and really conveys the sense of loss and tragedy through, as we've seen, numerous different quests and environmental factors. I also really enjoy how Duskwood parallels the threat of the Scourge in Lordaeron without being an exact copy. Corruption from Deadwind Pass and the whims of the Necromancer are just as compelling as the Undead Plague. Darkshire is made safer by your efforts, and you should be feeling pretty good rolling into level 30, virtually the halfway point to max level. However, in my opinion, Duskwood does not mean the end, lore-wise, of this human experience, and we have one more critical chapter to discuss before I wrap up today's video. So, let's recap. Elwyn, Westfall, Redridge, and Duskwood. 4 deeply connected zones that tell detailed, complex stories on their own, and in some cases together. With the Blackrock Orcs defeated, the Necromancer disposed of, and the Defias gang in shambles, now's the time for new adventures, right? Well, almost. Let's circle back to one crucial plot point that connects all 4 zones: their abandonment by Stormwind. These zones have all suffered from a lack of troop support, and it seems the military decisions by the royalty and nobility are not in the best interests of the people. There are more flagrant examples of corruption that we can find as well. Guard Burton in Lakeshire has the following to say. Targor the Dread served under Gathil Zog as Supreme Executioner. His methods were ruthless, even by filthy orc standards. Now he's being held in the Stormwind Stockade, sentenced to die. Yet something is amiss. One of the bureaucratic nobles put a hold on his execution. I am sure foul play is in the works. A suspiciously similar quest can be found in Darkshire. As if the neglect for the residents of Duskwood was not bad enough, now the House of Nobles spits in the eye of the Darkshire Council with their decision to imprison Dextrin Ward in Stormwind rather than behead the villain as per Lord Ebenlock's sentence. Both of these examples lead to the Stormwind Stockade, and it seems there is one other who also has an interest here. Baros Alexton isn't content with just the dead mines being cleared out, and he wants you to visit the stockade to find out more. Basil Thread, Van Cleef's right-hand man, has been imprisoned here for some time, and might know more about any residual schemes still underway. Talking with Thread is more difficult than you might have expected, however, as the Defias prisoners within are rioting, and the guards on the outside are barely holding them back. With this unforeseen turn of events, the Warden has effectively voided any criminal protections, inviting you and your allies to clear out the whole dungeon to protect the city. After completing the dungeon, the Warden rewards you with some information about Thread. Apparently, he received visits from a curious man, who we later learn is Marzone the Silent Blade, an assassin contracted by none other than Lord Gregor Lescavar, a shady member of the House of Nobles. This culminates in an assassination, where, after waiting for the guards to leave, you're able to interrupt a meeting between the two and dispatch them both, seemingly ending the corruption and preventing any chance for Van Cleef's revenge against Stormwind to come to fruition. The final quest, titled An Audience with the King, sends you to the Royal Keep to report on your findings. Reaching the throne room, you discover it is instead Lady Katrana Prester, another noble, who you report to. You are to be commended for the service you have done for Stormwind. Take this as a token of the king's appreciation. I am only sorry he cannot present it to you himself, but he is away on a diplomatic mission and shall not return for some time. For veteran players of the game, this moment is both really satisfying, but also really nerve-wracking, as despite this friendly reception that new players might pick up on, the corruption in Stormwind actually goes much deeper than just a few bandits and a single noble. But that's a story for another time. As somebody who started their WoW journey in Wrath of the Lich King many years ago, and only experienced vanilla very recently, I almost got chills reading this original version of the quest, which does a great job of setting up one of the major stories going forward, the missing diplomat. However, this here is more or less a clear-cut ending to the first half of the game for human players. 4 incredible zones down, and many more to be discovered. Perhaps you'll next lend your aid to the fallen kingdom of Strom in the north, venture into the dense jungles to the south, or head across the sea to see what awaits in the lands of Kalimdor. No matter how many human playthroughs of classic WoW I do, this level 1 to 30 journey always just feels special, And while everybody has their own different feelings and interpretations of it, I think I can confidently say this is some of the best work Blizzard has ever done. 20 years after its release, we're still feeding old Blanchie, running from Stitches, talking to a lion statue, and doing so much more within these zones. And I hope I've conveyed to you all today why that's the case. Thank you all so much for watching. If you made it this far, I wish you all a great start to your summers. And make sure you tune into the outros going forward for a couple hidden secrets. Until next time, may the Force be with you.